Okay, sweet. I think we will get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Hess. I'm the head of strategy here for the Real Champions. Thank you all for joining tonight. If you guys are comfortable or in the position to turn your cameras on, we'd of course love to see your faces. This is our second installment of the Like a Champ career workshops. Today we have the amazing Rachel Stander with us. She's also one of our next gen mentors and has been for the past two cohorts, which is amazing. It's amazing that she's willing to bring us her time tonight and impart her wisdom upon us. A little about Rachel. Rachel Stander is a Los Angeles-based independent producer working in narrative film. Stander's first feature, Scrap, world premiered at the Deauville American Film Festival in France and co-starred Anthony Rapp and Lana Parrilla. Her follow-up feature, Seance, a Victorian Gothic psychological thriller, premiered at the Newport Beach Film Festival. Stander is also a member of Women in Film, Film Independent, and the Gotham. She's the Los Angeles co-chair for Women Independent Producers, where she also serves as the program's coordinator. Stander was selected as a 2025 Stowe Producers Lab Fellow with the feminist neo-noir thriller Mama Don't, written by Ariana Ortiz. Through her company, A Season of Rain, Stander shepherds projects from development through delivery, and she has a proven record of fostering respectful, inclusive workspaces. Under her leadership, both Scrap and Seance were awarded the Reframe Stamp, a mark of distinction for projects that have demonstrated gender-balanced hiring across a production. As a producer, Stander is particularly drawn to female-driven stories that explore existential themes on an intimate scale. With that, I introduce you to Rachel Stander. Please take it away, Rachel.
Thank you, Julia, for the introduction. And thank you all for being here. I see some familiar faces, which is nice. I am going to, I'm going to screen share if I can figure out how on Google Meets. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see my presentation slide? Excellent. Okay, then here we go. All right, we already did introductions, but I will just reiterate here because I think it's important when you are talking about festivals to have context of who you are talking to and where they're coming from. So my context is that I am a producer. I'm an independent producer. I'm based in Los Angeles. I primarily work in narrative. That said, my films have played at festivals both nationally and internationally. And my approach to festival strategy is one that I encourage comprehensively considering your options, strategically selecting targets, and then the other key piece is to manage your submissions so that you are maximizing your budget, you're putting your dollars towards festivals that align with your specific goals. I know that today we have people who are both sort of, we have a range of experience levels with festivals. So we're going to start with basics and then work our way into strategy. So if you've, done festivals already, bear with us as we get through the basics. And then the last piece I want to say on this introduction slide is my argument in favor of festivals. I think sometimes festivals become frustrating. You're always going to get more no's than you get yeses, and people start to feel like, what am I spending my money on? It's not helping me sell the film. What's the point of this? And my response to that is festivals are one of the only places on the timeline of making your film when you get to pause and celebrate all of the work that you've done. Making films is hard. It takes years. And a festival is a moment where you can put aside all the work and just enjoy the fruits of your labor. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as you're sort of attaching value to festivals. All right, so jumping in with basics. Your festival submission platforms. Probably if you've done any festivals in the past, you're familiar with Film Freeway. It is ubiquitous these days, particularly for US festivals. Probably 80% of the festivals you'll submit to are through Film Freeway. It's very user-friendly. The pricing is transparent. It manages your submissions well. that is one where you will definitely want to set your film up. If you are looking to do international films, film festivals, Short Film Depot and Fest Home are platforms that you will probably end up using. They are more common with international festivals, and they're a little less user-friendly. So give yourself some time to deal with setting your film up there. But for the festivals that use them, if that's the only option, then of course you're gonna make it work and do your submissions. And then there are festivals that manage their submissions through their individual festival websites. Now, all of these platforms, including the individual festival websites, usually ask for the same information. So when you're doing your initial setup on Film Freeway, I recommend duplicating all of your info into Google Sheets so that you have it ready to go to easily copy paste into your other platforms as you make your way through your cycle. Tiers. It is helpful to think of festivals in terms of tiers. Sometimes people break it into 3 tiers, like a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, sometimes 4 tiers. I think of it as tier 1, tier 2, and then I use green flag, yellow flag, red flag, which for me is just like how closely you should look at it before spending dollars on the festival, assuming it fits your priorities. It's also sort of helpful to think of tiers in terms of, is it a festival you want to premiere at, or is it a festival that would be part of your entire run? Maybe it's not right for a premiere, but it's a fun festival. You have a relationship with them. You want to go, but you would, strategically want to have it be later in your run. And then a quick couple notes about premiere status. A lot of times festivals have a requirement relating to how new your film is. Like, to be eligible, your film must have been completed no later than June 27th of 2024, right? So they have 12 months. What that means is premiered no earlier than that date. The date your film premieres at its first festival becomes your official completion date. Up until it has been seen by public eyeballs at a festival, you are tinkering perpetually. It is not a completed film until it has been at a festival. Once it's premiered, that becomes your official completion date for all future festivals and IMDb. And then another thing that you'll run into with festivals is premiere requirements, where a festival wants to be your world premiere, your North American premiere, your Illinois state premiere, your Chicago premiere. They get more and more granular. We are living in a time when a lot of festivals have an online component. It became popular during COVID for obvious reasons, and a lot of festivals have kept that going. It makes economic sense for them. It makes the festival more accessible to people who maybe geographically can't be there. Most festivals will offer some kind of geo-blocking, which means people who buy tickets to the online portion of the festival can only access it if they are in a certain geographic location. So if it's geo-blocked to Illinois, people in Texas wouldn't be able to watch it. If it's geo-blocked to the US, people in France cannot watch it. If you are at the beginning of your run and you're trying to preserve your premiere status for future festivals, and you are accepted into a festival that has an online component, you want to talk to that festival about what your geo-blocking options are, or possibly opt out of the online portion of the festival if they cannot geo-block it in a way that allows you to keep your premiere status intact for other festivals. All right, so top tier festivals. These are your, the top tier, tier 1. People always want to know, like, what are the festivals in there? Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6, sometimes 10, sometimes 15. So this is the 15 that you might find in the top tier. The 5 you will always find are Berlin, Cannes, Sundance, Toronto, and Venice. And then depending on who you're talking to, where they live, what kind of film they have, they might be including some of these others in what they are thinking of as top tier. A lot of these top tier festivals have a market associated with them. Because of that, they are drawing buyers. So these are festivals that are going to have more of an industry presence. They are also festivals that often are doing a lot of their programming not from open submissions, but through arrangements with agents, sales agents, representatives of the director or people on the film's team. These are films that are part of a larger distribution strategy, a marketing strategy. So it's not that you shouldn't submit to these, but in a strategy, I will generally budget for these separately. I think of these as aspirational festivals, unless you went through 5 Sundance labs and are best friends with a Sundance programmer. It's probably aspirational. So when you submit, just, I budget separately. I still submit. And if you want to submit to Sundance, you should, even though it's aspirational. And then at the other end of the spectrum are red flag festivals. They might be scams. They might just be really sketchy or exploitative. And so these are potential red flags. These are all potential. Potential is an important word here because some festivals have these things and they are fine. But if I see any of these sort of characteristics on a festival, I'm going to dig deeper before I commit budget to that festival. Festivals that are online only, meaning they have no in-person events. If they are monthly, like, it's a lot of work to put on a festival. It takes a lot of money and coordination and staff. And if they're doing it every month, it means it's a different kind of event. If it's only one day long, if a festival mentions being IMDb qualifying on their Film Freeway description, that is a description that has carried over from many years ago when all of the submissions were handled through a different website called Without a Box, and you had to submit through that in order to get onto IMDb. And now you don't need to do that. You can just get your film on IMDb, even if you've never played at a festival. So if their description includes that, it means they've just copy pasted, and not thought critically at all about how they're presenting their festival, which for me is a red flag. If a festival reaches out to you directly and says, oh my God, we love your film, we'd love for you to submit it, here's a discount, 10% off, 20% off. That is a little bit of a red flag because festivals will reach out, programmers will reach out if they've seen your film at another festival or heard about it somehow. But when they do that, and it's legitimate, they generally give you a full waiver or they just request a screening link. They're not going to charge you. If you're getting an email with a discount code, it's probably that they're trying to drum up more submissions and more revenue for their festival by buying an email list of filmmakers on Film Freeway, and they're emailing all of them to try to bring in more submissions. So these are red flags for me. They're ways to spot these festivals, to encourage yourself to do a little more digging before you give them any of your money so that you're not wasting your budget on festivals that are not going to serve you. Okay, so those were kind of basics. Do we have any questions about basics before we move into a little more strategy? Carla, do you want to unmute?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for this, first and foremost. My question is, at the end of that last red flag, it was if the festival has long submission dates. Yeah, extremely long submission window. I've been seeing a lot of that on Film Freeway, along with like best cinematographer, best actor, like all of that adding on. And I don't know how I feel about that. So is that something that just to keep digging deep in? And a lot of ones that are been like a 5-year run festival too.
Yeah. So for me, those are red flags it sounds like it's tweaking your antenna as well. If it's an extremely long submission window, like there are festivals where their submission window is more than a year long, which, how are they staffing, programmers to be watching films for a full year? Like, it doesn't make any sense. They're just trying to maximize their submission capture so that they get more submission fees from filmmakers. It also allows them to step up the cost on submission fees bit by bit for a longer period of time. And then the like all the awards is, I mean, I don't really know what the point of that is, other than like, well, first of all, if they make you submit to different categories and charge you for each category, that would be a huge red flag. So if you have to submit separately for best cinematography, best editing, best directing, and they're charging you 3 times to submit to 3 categories, that's a huge red flag. Some festivals do have a lot of categories, or like not categories, a lot of different awards, but that, it's like it happens at the festival, not on Film Freeway when you're submitting. So things like that, where it's just that they're trying to pull in more revenue, like, I just think that would make me dig further and look for more evidence that it's a worthwhile festival for my dollars. Yeah, that's my feeling on that. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So before you can make a strategy, you have to be clear about what your goals are. And your considerations. So on the one hand, it's your priorities and then restrictions. So your stakeholder priorities, and this is going to come from, it could be your core filmmaker team, like the producers, the director. It could be your investors, the people who put in the money, donors or investors. If you plan to go back to them for more, you want to make sure that you are meeting their needs with your plan for festivals. So, some examples of what your stakeholder priorities could be. Maybe your priority is to network with other filmmakers. That means you want to be in person at a festival where other filmmakers are in person at the festival. Attending screenings with a live audience. Maybe you want to sort of wrap your film in some industry prestige and respectability, and by extension, your own career. If you want to drum up press for the film or for people on the film, parts of your team, maybe your priority or your stakeholders' priority is that you want to play at an Oscar qualifying festival. So, there's various things that could be a priority for you. It's really important before you start designing a strategy to be clear about what your priorities actually are. Unless you have a very large budget, you should probably narrow it down to maybe 2 priorities and design your strategy around that. You could have a third priority in the back of your mind in case one of those first 2 gets achieved very quickly. But, to keep yourself in a reasonable budget, more than 2 is going to get expensive to be serving more than 2 priorities. And then you have restrictions, which are, the main ones are budget and timeline pressure. Timeline pressure being, are you pushing for the best premiere, which requires patience, or are you pushing for the soonest premiere, which means maybe giving up on, what maybe would be a better festival in favor of premiering sooner. And, I know people whose feature films have gotten distribution. The distribution date is set, and they have an agreement with the distributor that up until a certain date, they can continue to do festivals. But after that date, they have to stop. So for those films, for example, they are looking at what they can do sooner rather than best. And then in terms of budget, it's not just about your submission fees. It's also taking into consideration deliverables and travel costs. Traveling your filmmakers to the festival is expensive. Some festivals will offer, support for travel, for lodging, for food, feeding filmmakers during the festival. some will not. So, being realistic about what you can actually afford to participate in. And then deliverables, thinking about what is going to be required there. There's lots of international festivals that are very cheap to submit to, but if they are going to require foreign language subtitles burned into the film, then you're looking at getting a translation done. You're looking at getting another DCP made. That's going to add budget, add costs once you've been accepted. And maybe that's worth it to you. But if you're only submitting because it's cheap, but you can't actually afford to participate in the festival, then like maybe that shouldn't be part of your strategy. So once you know what your considerations are, then this is my approach. I start gathering data. So the data, like we're going to talk about data points here now because I love me some data. And there's a lot of data to consider in building a database. And that's what we're working up to. We're going to build a database and then we're going to use the database. So what's going into your database? These are sort of hard facts, dates, like straightforward numbers, costs. So for the dates, I would be looking at when it opens, when the deadlines are, when the festival actually happens. I'm looking at how many, what's the duration of the festival? How long is it? Is it 3 weeks long? If it is, and if my priority is to network with other filmmakers, realistically, how much overlap is there going to be between my travel for the dates that I'm screening and other filmmakers' travel that might be on the last week instead of the first week? So thinking about the duration of a festival and like how is that going to affect filmmaker attendance can be really helpful. Location, which goes back to budget. Can you afford to be there? It's also going to come up again when we're looking at points of alignment between your film and the festival. The cost to submit. So for my database, what I compile is the maximum fee for both features and shorts. I don't try to look at like all the various, early bird cost, regular deadline. I just look at the maximum, and like comparing the maximum across festivals gives me an idea of sort of where they fall in terms of budget. The plan is you never pay the maximum. So we'll get into that later. Length requirements. This one's really important for doing, are you eligible or not? Most festivals have requirements about maximum length for a short, minimum length for a feature. Some have maximum lengths for features. And that can, very quickly knock you out of contention for a festival. I look at how many years it's been running. Is it well established or is it new? Is it likely that the festival is going to, be well organized and put on a good event? Or are they going to be, making it happen as by the seat of their pants, and who knows what we're getting into? And then looking at qualifier status for Oscars, Gotham Awards, Spirit Awards. If you're, in the UK, maybe you're looking at BAFTA qualifiers. And these are things that you'd be finding on the festival submission website, on, Film Freeway or the other ones, maybe reading the regulations to find these sort of just like factual pieces of information. Then you also want to be collecting information about sort of softer data points. Are there premiere requirements? World premiere, international, North American, however granular they're going to get. You want to make a note of what those are. Will they accept films that are already online? That doesn't mean like it played at a festival. That means, is it on Omeletto's channel? Like, is it on Vimeo staff picks? Is it publicly available on an online platform at the time when you're submitting? Some festivals allow that, some do not. I will make a note of tier, which, shifts around sometimes. Targeted interests for the festival. This is going to be huge in your strategy. Is it a genre festival? Do they program experimental films? Is it for queer filmmakers or queer films? Do they specifically program female filmmakers? Are they looking for Latinx filmmakers, Black filmmakers, African diaspora filmmakers, MENA filmmakers, like whatever they are looking for, you want to make a note of it, because then you're going to be looking for where your points of alignment are. Lists or affiliations. Movie Maker puts out lists of the 50 most fun festivals of 2025. They've got a bunch of them. So, what are the festivals that are getting onto these lists? You could look at Film Festival Alliance. They've got sort of an opt-in membership for festivals that want to provide a certain level of transparency and other information. That's a good resource. FIAPF is an organization that accredits and regulates international festivals. So if you're looking at international festivals, that's a good indicator of what is an established and good festival. You could look at previous festival partners for Film Fatales. Maybe those are going to be festivals that are more geared towards elevating women's voices. And then the last piece that you'll look for is anecdotal information from fellow filmmakers. Talk to your filmmaker friends. Find out about the festivals that they went to. Were they well organized? Did they have a good experience? Did they have a bad experience? And I take all of that information and just keep adding it into my database and building in this information so that I have it to refer back to, for the life of my career. The other thing that you can find out from fellow filmmakers is what truly the festival offered to filmmakers. How much did they feed you? Who really is getting a hotel room? Who's getting flown? Are they doing ground transportation? What do you have to ask for? What do they give? Those are things that, maybe they're not going to be transparent about on their Film Freeway page, but you can find out if you talk to other filmmakers who've been to the festival. And if you don't have other filmmakers to talk to, these are some resources that you could get information from. So the Film Festival Alliance directory is online and it's publicly available. Movie Makers lists. I highly recommend joining the subreddit for film festivals. It has a lot of very candid information. It is the internet, so it will lean heavily towards people either loving something or really having a terrible experience, because that's how the internet works. There's not so much middle ground, but it will give you candid, first-person experiences from people who've been to festivals. What you should not rely on is the reviews that get publicly posted on Film Freeway. Those are, I would say, not helpful in determining the actual value of a festival and how it's actually being run. Okay, so now, and then the last piece, because we're looking for alignment, is to consider your own team, the team of your film. The director's identity is going to be a big piece of this. Age, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, filmography. There are festivals that will program based on all of those for the director. There are also festivals that might take into consideration identity of the larger team, but for sure the director's identity will make a difference. Where did the film get produced? Where did you shoot? Also, where's the team from? Where do you have local ties? Where could the team maybe, sleep on couches instead of paying for hotel rooms? Where would it be easy for you to travel to? Where do you have a built-in audience? You want to look at alumni status of the director and the producer. That's a budgetary thing, because the director and the producer can usually get discounts, alumni discounts from festivals that their films have played at. In addition to, it just being nice to come back as an alumni. You also can look at the alumni status of other team members, which might not get you a discount, but it's good to mention when you're submitting your film if your core creative or core producing team members are alumni of the festival. And then membership organizations that provide discounts. Again, this is a budgetary concern, but if your director or producer are members of organizations like Film Fatales or Women Independent Producers or PANO, there are discounts available for festivals through these organizations for their members. So it's very helpful to know and then flag those festivals when you're doing your strategy and looking at your budget. All right, now we've built our database. And you know, the database will grow and grow as you continue to build it out. My database currently has over 700 festivals in it. There is no film that would submit to all 700 of these, because from that bigger list, then we're going to create a target list. So the first step in creating the target list is quick exclusions. These are festivals that you can rule out based on surface level criteria. You don't need to dig deep. For example, if you have a documentary, you would not submit to a festival that only does narrative, and vice versa. If you have a short, you would not submit to a festival that only programs features. You get the idea there. Okay, festival focus. If you are, you know, if you're a man and everybody involved in making the film, your entire cast and crew is men, you would not submit to a festival that is, you know, women's voices, women filmmakers. And then length criteria. If you have a 25-minute short film and a festival has a 20-minute maximum on short films, you are not eligible. So you can just cross it out. You don't need to dig deeper. If you have a 25-minute film or a 26-minute film and they have a 25-minute limit and like you're really aligned, you maybe would send them an email to see if there's any wiggle room, but generally there is not. So these are examples of very good films, did well at festivals, but like these are festivals they would not submit to because of quick exclusions. You know, Hundreds of Beavers would not submit to Frameline. Frameline programs queer films. Hundreds of Beavers has no queer themes. Shiva Baby is narrative. Hot Docs is for documentaries. Ghostlight is a narrative feature film. Clermont-Ferrand, great festival for shorts. So, you know, we're crossing things off the list left and right, narrowing our targets. Then you can do quick inclusions. This is where you're going to look at alumni status. You're going to look at what the festival's focus is. These are things you're looking for, points of alignment. And so, you know, for example, I would look at DD, which, and this is, I was not involved in DD. I don't know what their strategy was, but this is how I would approach DD potentially in building a strategy. So DD had Asian American filmmakers. It was an Asian American immigrant story. So I would be looking at festivals that program to the Asian American experience. I would be putting those on my quick inclusion list. DD was made, it was shot in the Bay Area. It was set in the Bay Area. It had Bay Area funding support. It had support from the San Francisco, like it had, you know, it had institutional support from San Francisco. I would be hitting up all the San Francisco festivals. It also had a first-time feature director. So then I would be hitting up all the festivals that have, that either the entire festival is devoted to first or second or third features, or they have a specific competition categories for first, second, third time feature film directors, because you are trying to sort of narrow the field of who you're in competition with for those slots. Maximum points of alignment is what we want. You might also look at submission fees and costs, and like anything that's under $5, maybe you're going to submit to, because why not? Festival location, you know, like if you shot in Vermont and your whole team is Vermont based, you should probably submit to Vermont festivals. Maybe also Maine and Rhode Island and like New England. Maybe hit up all of New England and Montreal, because you can travel to them easily, and there's not that much that gets shot in Vermont. So festivals in that area will be happy to see it on screen. So, you know, that is sort of how you go through, you know, what your film and your film team is made up of, and looking for the points of alignment with a festival. And like, you know, you can, in your database, ideally, you can sort and filter for all of this to do this very quickly. And then if you've done all of that and you feel like your list is not as complete as you'd like it to be, then I recommend looking at comps, or, just for fun, look at comps. So the way that I would look at comps is I look for films that are premiered within the last 5 years. You don't want to go too much further back than that, especially, now I would maybe even, COVID years were a little weird. So if I can get something that was, maybe not right in the middle of COVID, that would be better. I'm looking for films that are similar in budget, genre, and level of celebrity. So like if you're a first-time feature film director, don't look at Scarlett Johansson's film and say, well, she's a first-time feature film director, I'm going to follow that same path, because that is apples to oranges and you are setting yourself up for frustration. And then looking for films that played at one of your aspirational festivals. So the way that I would look for comps is I would go to previous years' programs at Sundance, at Tribeca, at South by, and look for films in there that have some overlap, some similarities with the film that I'm creating strategy for. Then once I've identified the comp, I'm going to look for all the festivals that that film played at. What was their entire run, in addition to this like aspirational festival that we have in common? You can find this sometimes on IMDb Pro. Sometimes you're looking at the website for the film or the director or the production company. Sometimes you can find it on YouTube. If they've got a trailer on YouTube, the thumbnail might have laurels on it. So you have to do a little digging to find what other festivals it played at, but you're building out a list of, comps. So when I'm doing this, I do all of my databases in Airtable. I build it as a linked table so that, and I'll show you this later, but once you've, gone through and identified the festivals that your comps have played at, then you can sort your list of 700 some festivals to just show you the festivals that your multiple comps played at, and make sure you're considering those for your current film. And then you're going to continue fine-tuning this list based, again, on your budget and priorities. Being realistic about your budget. And if you're pushing the top end of what your budget can allow, and you've got a bunch of European festivals on there, maybe you need to take the time to look at what those festivals' previous year's programs were. How many, if you're a US, I'm just going to assume here we're in the US. If you're, a US filmmaker, how many US films actually got programmed? You're eligible. They say they'll program you, but how many actually are they programming? And of those US films, how many of them premiered at one of those top 5, tier 1 festivals? Or are they doing discovery of US productions? If they're not doing discovery, if they're only programming things that played at Cannes, then maybe it's not worth your dollars. And then I do recommend a balance of aspirational and strategic. I think it's, take your shot with the Sundances of the world, whichever ones you care about the most and really want to spend your dollars on. Think about that budget separately so that, you're not maybe submitting to all 15 of the top tier festivals, but 3 or 4 of them, whatever you feel like you can afford on lottery tickets, as a separate budget from your strategy. I think believe in your film and submit to where you want to submit and give yourself that chance. But what you're doing as you're fine-tuning is you are trying to move from this diagram on the left where you only have one point of alignment, which might be your aspirational festivals, where the point of alignment is you want it. It aligns with your priorities of wanting to be in the festival. And you want to, maximize the number of festivals that are more like the diagram on the right, where you just have a lot of points of alignment. You're very much right for the festival. You can go. They're programming films like yours. Like, that is a more strategic choice to submit to. Then you're going to look at scheduling your submissions and the timing of submissions, because a film festival cycle for a feature film will take 18 to 24 months. The first 6 to 12 months is for your premiere and trying to sort of get the best premiere you can possibly get. And then you move into like the rest of your cycle. For a short film, it might be more like 12 to 18 months, with the first 3 to 6 are focused on your best possible premiere before moving into cycle. And that's because for short films, fewer festivals have strict premiere requirements, is why you can have a shorter sort of window for preserving premiere requirements. This shows the order in which the top tier, those tier 1 festivals happen. A lot of people will plan their cycle according to this schedule so that they are submitting, the first thing they'll submit to is Sundance, and then they'll submit to all of these. Now, not all of these festivals require a world premiere, but some of them do. And, you know, any of these, if you premiere at them, you're in very good shape. These would all be excellent premieres. But if you submit to all of these and don't get into any of them, you've just spent a year of potential festivals with no programming. So what ends up happening is people will sprinkle in tier 2 festivals, maybe some festivals below tier 2, and they're hedging their bets. They're taking a chance that, you know, maybe they'll get into Sundance and they'll be off to the races. But if they don't, then they want, you know, they don't want to wait a year before they submit to tier 2s. So for example, Rotterdam happens at the end of January. So maybe you're submitting to Rotterdam in your first year of cycle. You're taking the chance that if you get into Rotterdam, it's going to knock you out of contention at some of these later festivals. But Rotterdam's an excellent festival. It's a very good tier 2 festival. Very good. And it requires a world premiere. So if you get into one of these other festivals in your first year and you didn't submit to Rotterdam, then you can't submit to Rotterdam anyway for the second year because it required a world premiere. So, you know, your first year, especially for a feature, you're layering in festivals that, you know, they're not, I don't want to call them backup festivals. They're not backup festivals. They're excellent festivals. But you're layering in your tier 2s and your high sort of tier 3s or whatever you're calling below tier 2s, so that you're not delaying your acceptances on those. But you're doing it knowing if you get in, then you have to make a choice of accepting it and saying no to tier 1s that come later in the cycle, or saying no to the festival, this tier 2 festival, in the hopes of getting into a tier 1 later in the year, which is, I would say, not a great move. RJ, I'm going to keep going just so that we can get through this. But we'll have time for questions at the end. All right. And then executing the plan. So once you have your list and it's sort of within your budget and you've figured out the timing, then what you want to do is you want to have a way to manage your submissions so that you are submitting early in the cycle rather than late, because cheaper submission fees. Also, it's better to be in the programmer's mind early rather than at the end. If you submit at the very end of a cycle, of a submission window, some festivals have already sort of penciled in their program. And in order for you to get programmed at that point, you have to knock another film off their schedule, which is harder than if you get in early and let somebody fall in love with you as they're building the schedule. You want to pull together all of your discount codes and waivers so you have those ready to go. You should know who from the team you're going to mention as an alumni in your cover letter. You keep track of your actual spend so you know where you are budget-wise. And then you're going to adjust your strategy as you go based on where you get in. If you get into Sundance, then suddenly you are submitting to a lot of places that you would maybe hold off on for premiere reasons. Whereas if your premiere is coming later and later, you're, you know, maybe pushing some of your like cycle festivals to the next year, holding them because they're not a place, you know, that you would want to premiere at. All right, I'm going to do a very quick Airtable demo of how this looks in Airtable, if I can figure out how to switch views. All right. Great. Okay. So this is a demo view of my Airtable database. And so this, I sort of, you know, this is dummied up in terms of the planning that's happening around a theoretical film. But let me go. Okay, so I did mark some of these. Great. So submission batch. This is where I would go to keep an eye on festivals I plan to submit to. These I have marked when I made my plan that I'm going to submit to them. And this view is set up to sort so that I know when the next deadline is coming up, when that price is going to go up, so that I get my submissions in before the price bumps. And it is also sorted by like the festivals I'm absolutely definitely submitting to versus festivals. And this, again, like this is just dummied up. This was not a real strategy I put together here. But like Cucaloris, I marked as dependent. So that's one where if you get into Sundance and you're not worried about premiere status anymore, then maybe Cucaloris gets bumped up to an absolutely submit. But if you don't get into Sundance and you're like, you know, waiting and trying to figure out your premiere, then maybe Cucaloris gets pushed to 2027. And then the other thing I talked about was comps. So I will share here. So if you, let's see. So I was working with a filmmaker earlier this year who had a live action puppetry film for adults that was like 30 minutes long. So I went through my quick exclusions, I went through my quick inclusions, and the list I had for this filmmaker was not very robust. So it had a lot of festivals on it, but it didn't have festivals that were specific to what her film was. And I really wanted to make sure we had some festivals with more points of alignment. So I went out and I looked for other live action puppetry films to use as comps. So those here were The Newt Congress, Our Mine, El Triste, and Misophonia. And I went through and I marked all the festivals that those films had played at for each of them. And then I went back into the database and I filtered the view. And this is, you know, this is my little sales pitch, I guess, for Airtable. But I filtered the view to show me any festival that had programmed one of those 4 comps. And then I have a list as I do this here. So then I have a list of, okay, there's 49 festivals that programmed one of these 4 films, short films, live action puppetry. Okay, so these festivals are open to this kind of pretty niche film. Some of these maybe had already been excluded based on length requirements, or I don't know, some of them maybe were like, I guess none of these would have been documentary because then they wouldn't have been a comp. But I would then go through and look at, okay, well, which of these festivals should we consider? And looking at location, again, looking at budget, still, you know, considering them, but this gives me more of a list to look at with festivals I know will program films like that one. All right, so that's our Airtable demo. Let me go back over here. Let's see, are we back? Okay. And then outsourcing. So I know like this is a lot of information overload. There are a few ways that you can make your festival strategy easier. So there are services out there, what I would think of as a white glove service, where you pay them a fee, you give them your film, they create a strategy, they handle your submissions, they handle your deliverables, they talk to the festivals on your behalf to try to get discounts, they leverage their relationships to try to get you into the festivals. They are handling it entirely for you. You are hands off. You find out when you get accepted and you go. If you have other things to do and you don't want to put time into this, that is an option if you have the money for it. Then there's festival strategists. There are a lot of people who offer festival strategy services. In my experience, a lot of them will give you a list of like 20 to 30 festivals that they probably have personal experience with, or close anecdotal experience with. That is, it's a good resource if you want a short list of someone's thoughts based on your film. I also do festival consulting. I will make lists. My lists tend to be longer. They're more comprehensive as a starting point that you can then, continue to finesse. But what I really love to do is to teach people how to use Airtable and set them up with an interactive database that they can use themselves and continue to build on throughout their career. And if I'm doing this Airtable with you, in addition to sort of doing the initial configuration, I do offer that I can sync the data for all of those hard data points, the dates, the cost, all of that can be synced from my database to yours so that you're not having to update that on your own. Which, that would be how that's obviously how I would like to work. So if you're a producer, you're managing multiple films, you're sort of, you're thinking beyond just this one film that you currently have at hand. That is a way to, develop your database yourself over time. All right, time for questions. And I'm gonna get rid of the screen share so that we can see each other. All right, so who's got questions?
Awesome. I think we'll start off with the ones that were sent at the top. It looks like Jude John. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. I'm happy to read them aloud if you'd like. We've got the first one is, what is your, okay, let's see. What is it? Okay, sorry. Okay, I feel like we've answered that one. Oh, okay. This is a great one. I think that I'm not sure if we've answered, but typically, how long does a feature film remain on the festival circuit? What is
Yeah. I mean, typically 12 to 18 months. It might push more to 24, depending on how it's doing. Also, if it doesn't have a distributor at that point, once a distributor gets involved, there's going to be limits put on your festival run, and they're going to want a stop date because they don't want you cannibalizing distribution eyeballs with festival screenings. But if that's not a consideration, then you might keep going for however long you keep getting yeses. And especially for a feature where they're providing probably more support to get the filmmaker to the festival, it's not such a burden on your budget maybe as it would be for a short, where it's much more out of pocket for the filmmaker to attend those festivals. But yeah, I mean, generally somewhere between 12 and 24 months on the circuit.
Okay, and then we've got another one in the chat from Dylan. And they said, aside from your services, are there other festival consultation services you can recommend?
Yeah. I know I should have made a list of them beforehand. Film Festival Doctor, I think, is one. There's also a company, a UK-based company. I can't think of the name, but they do good work. I know they also love their Airtables. That would be something I would go to filmmaker or film festival Reddit and ask about, because also you want to find out from people who have actually gotten those services, who've worked with those consultants, what their experience was like. And what I see often from consultants is they go in one of two directions. So I've seen lists that consultants have put together that's all tier 1 and tier 2 festivals and nothing else. And I don't think that's a great strategy. They're just picking the festivals that like have the most name recognition, from what they know. And it's because of that person's background, and those are the festivals that they see value in. On the other end, I see strategists put together lists that include no tier 1 or tier 2 festivals because they see it as sort of they're trying to be realistic with the filmmaker and maximize the number of yeses they're going to get, the ratio of yeses to nos. They want to be more yeses. So they don't put so many stretch festivals on their lists. In both of those scenarios, I would consider those incomplete. I don't think either one of those is a good strategy. And I don't think either one of those really takes into consideration. I mean, I doubt it takes into full consideration really the priorities of the filmmakers and the stakeholders. I think that's more just based on the consultant's experience rather than prioritizing like what does the stakeholder, filmmaker, investors, donors, whoever the stakeholders are, what do they want out of their festival experience?
Parker, you want to go?
Yeah, thank you. This is really helpful. Thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit more about how to think about like tier 3, tier 4 festivals specifically? I had an experience recently where I was sort of doing this process for a project that was pretty modest, and the goal was sort of more like pick up some laurels that we can sort of use for some press, more so than like actually going to festivals and shaking hands and trying to sell the project. But so as you know, that tier is like very noisy, and in particular, I sort of fell victim a lot to the thing of like, submissions are closing this week, like here's a discount. I understand now that that's generally more a money grab than like they're actually looking for more festivals, or more films. But so yeah, how would we think about like the how to know which options in like tier 3, tier 4 actually might be good candidates to get laurels from?
Well, if your priority is laurels, and I would interrogate you a little bit on that, because you said laurels to get press, which are two different things.
Yeah, sort of for our own press, to be able to post on Instagram and put the ad, and yeah.
What I would say then is what you're looking for is laurels from festivals that have some sort of industry recognition. Not in the way that like, your top tier Cannes and Sundance have, but in like, people have heard of them. Other filmmakers have heard of the festival, which, knocks out anything that I'm probably putting as a red flag, probably also yellow flags. So then you're dealing with, yes, it's a crowded tier. The green flag, tier 3, 4s there's a lot of festivals in there. So then you have to take into consideration your budget and where does it make sense to be submitting. If you're not traveling, that's fine. That's not a budget consideration. But the submission fees and deliverables, and what can you realistically do? You submit to as many as you can that will have actual name value. There's a lot of really great regional and local festivals that have name value, that have good reputations, that you can submit to in that tier if what you're looking for is laurels that other filmmakers will recognize and, think, oh, you must have made a good film because that festival programs good films. The one way that you would maybe research those is if you have a question, if you're not sure if a festival has that kind of value, see if you can find their previous year's programs. Do you recognize the name of any of the films that were in their programs? If you've been to festivals in the last couple cycles, the last few years, look at the program for the year that you were doing festivals. If you don't recognize any film that they programmed, if there was no overlap between where your film played and any of the films that they programmed, then that's a question mark for me of where, nobody in your circle is submitting to this festival. Should you submit to it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
No one else can think of a question right now. I actually have one. I'm super curious if you've ever used or worked with a publicist to help drum up, buzz or getting people in seats for your film premiere. I know, obviously, especially at the Newport Beach one, which is very close to Los Angeles, I'm sure you were trying to get people in LA to come down and see your film. So I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah, so the film that played in Newport Beach, I was not involved with the publicist at that point. There was a publicist involved.
Oh.
We for Deauville, we had a publicist. For when Scrap premiered in the US, it premiered at Cinequest. We had a publicist around that. Publicists, I've also explored using a publicist for short films. I haven't ended up doing it, and I do my own outreach to press. Again, I use Airtable. I look at comps. I look at what, other films like mine, other short films, where are they getting coverage? For publicists, they're not really there to get butts in seats. They are there to get reviews and interviews. That's their job. They will also do a little interfacing with the festival. So they might help facilitate the red carpet events for you. They might help facilitate other opportunities at the festival. Depending on what that publicist's relationship with the festival is, they may be more or less helpful. And when you bring on a publicist, you bring them on for the festival. Generally, like an individual, a director, a producer, an actor might have a publicist on an ongoing basis. But when a film brings on a publicist, it's around a festival, and not every publicist will cover every festival, because if they don't have relationships with the festival, if they don't have relationships with press who cover that festival, if they can't do anything for you and they're ethical, they won't take that job. So you're looking for a publicist who has relationships with the festival or with press that cover the festival, and their job is to get you reviews and interviews. They really are not involved in getting butts in seats.
Thank you so much. That was super helpful. I've always been curious, and I've heard people not using publicists, using them. Is it worth it? Especially when you're starting out,
I think it's really, if, and this goes back to stakeholder priorities. If one of your stakeholder priorities is to level up your own career, then I think having a publicist can be really helpful with that, because they can get you, interviews, they can get you press, they can get you things that legitimize you as a person working in the industry. If that's not one of your priorities, then it's a lot of money for something you don't really care about. So yeah, because they're not cheap.
Exactly. Yeah. It's is that, a priority or worth it?
Yeah.
Monetarily.
And I think also, you can look at, when you get accepted to a festival, you can ask if they have an accredited press list. If they don't, if the festival does not do any work on their side to get press coverage, to get press looking at the films, to get, if it's entirely on you, that's a consideration of how much work you're going to need to be paying your publicist to be doing, versus are they coming into an established machine that's got some relationships built that they can come in and work with, versus is none of that already in place? And some festivals are really good about that, and some do none. They don't do any of it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Does anyone else have any more questions? Feel free to raise a hand. Or if you don't want to be on camera or whatever, you can also put it in the chat and I'm happy to read it. Oh, I do see one that I don't think this one was answered. Yeah. On average, how many festivals does a feature film get submitted to? Would it be around 100 to 200 festivals, or is that considered high? It depends. I know it depends on budget, but what's typical?
Yeah, I mean, that's very hard to answer. It does depend on budget. It also depends on how it's going. If you get programmed at Sundance, then your film will get invited to other festivals rather than you submitting. You start to, you get pulled in by programmers who want to play the Sundance film at their festival. If you go through your tier ones, your tier twos, you're still looking for your premiere, you're going to keep submitting to festivals. And so, it does depend on budget. But also at some point, like you're not necessarily paying for all of those. Oh, and I did say we were going to go back to this idea of budget. So when I'm collecting my information and I'm collecting the maximum, the idea is you might pay the maximum for your first submission, maybe your first and second, because if you're like most filmmakers and your first submission is to Sundance, because that's just the cycle, you might be finishing your film with that as your deadline in mind. You're submitting right before the final deadline, getting it in, then you actually start your cycle of submissions. So you're paying the maximum to Sundance unless you happen to have a discount. But the rest of your submissions, you're not paying the maximum to, because you are submitting earlier in the cycle. You're leveraging alumni status for discounts. You're leveraging memberships to organizations that can provide discounts. So, if I look at like the sum of the maximums for my strategy, I know I can probably knock 30 to 50% off of that cost, maybe more, to what my actual paid will be. So, and as you start to get programmed, that, you might be offered discounts, legitimate discounts to other festivals, or just invited to other festivals where programmers from one festival saw you at, and want you to come play theirs. And I don't know, does that count as a submission? Maybe not. So a number is really hard to talk about. Budget, typical cost for a publicist. Well, for a feature at a top tier festival, a publicist could be anywhere in the range of $8,000 to $14,000 for a feature film at Sundance, at Tribeca, Toronto, one of those. You're paying for a machine of people to show up, to be on the ground with you, to bring materials. Like, you're paying for a lot. Ideally, they're also arranging screenings ahead of time with buyers, potential buyers, depending on what you already have attached to your film. They may be filling in some of those spots for you, trying to get you exposure to sales agents, to distributors. So, they're doing a lot of work, but it's expensive. For short films, I'm trying to think of what I got quoted earlier this year by somebody. I think it was like 30. It was like a 6-week period, and it was going to be 3,500. And then, if you wanted more than that, it was like $800 a week ongoing. So again, it's not cheap. It's an expensive thing, which is why you want to consider the festival that you're hiring them for, and not spend that money for a festival that can't actually like get you good press. If press doesn't cover the festival, then you're wasting your money paying for a publicist who can't like deliver anything. And a publicist should be able to have that conversation with you based on experience of, you know, realistically what they can expect to deliver. Oh, and festival strategists. I mean, you know, it really depends on like how hands-on they're being. It could be anywhere from like a couple $100 to 1,000, 1,500. If they're doing white glove service and managing all of your submissions, they're probably charging an ongoing like fee as well.
I have another question, and obviously I think this is a whole huger conversation, but if you wouldn't mind touching a little bit about navigating the landscape of a film festival once you're there, especially at those bigger ones. Like, yeah, I've never attended even one of them, so kind of what your mindset's like, and obviously you're networking, and yeah, I'm just really curious if you wouldn't mind sharing your experience a little.
Yeah. Again, it really depends on the festival, because every festival is gonna be different. Be in communication with the festival going in. Know what their programming is. Know what your schedule is. I would say approach it like work. You're there to work. Even if you're going to parties, it's work. Give yourself a schedule. Give yourself what you're doing each day. Make sure you get enough sleep. If you're going to a festival that's got elevation, don't drink too much. You are at work the whole time you're there. And like, you know, even more so when it is a big festival, a premiere, you're there to work. You're there to represent your film. You're there to get eyeballs on it. You're there to network, to hopefully get someone interested in buying or representing it. When you're in the cycle further along, then you can have more fun. Then you can, you know, still know what your schedule is. When I go to film festivals, I really try to watch the other films. I look at the schedule ahead of time. I really appreciate festivals that have, you know, that screen films more than once, and block their schedule out in a way where the filmmakers have a pretty good, you know, opportunity to see all the other films that are playing. Because then when you are at the bar later with the other filmmakers, you have context for conversations. You're talking about specifics. It becomes a much more like intimate filmmaker to filmmaker networking experience, as opposed to like, I don't know, you know, if you're in LA, I'm sure you've experienced the thing where you're in a room and everybody's just trying to like evaluate what value everybody else brings to the room. You can get beyond that by, you know, having filmmaker to filmmaker conversations about the films that everybody showed up at the festival with. The nice thing about festivals is every filmmaker at a festival was selected by the festival. There's sort of an assumption of you've done something worthwhile. So we don't need to evaluate if you are a worthwhile person to talk to. You can get over that hump very quickly. And then, you know, it's an opportunity to just like spend time with other people who care about the same things you care about, and talk shop. And if you've seen their films, you could talk shop specifically. You know, how did you do this? Where was this location? How did you permit that? What did that thing cost? Do you have recommendations for this? And I've met people at festivals and then later realized like, oh, they worked with this composer I really want to work with. And I'll reach out to them and get a referral. And then like we get a good price on our composer because of it, as opposed to reaching out cold. So those relationships can really help you in your career. But yeah, I mean, approach it like work, be professional, don't get sloppy drunk, but have a good time, be fun to be around, you know, and also take time to yourself if you need to. If you need to go for a walk or stare at a wall, do that too.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful advice and insights. Yeah, thank you so much. That's awesome. did we see another in the chat? Let's see.
There you go. Cruz is saying, yeah, 3,000 for a submission service in the UK for short film.
Yeah, that was a white glove service though. They did everything. I was for a short film, and I would argue that it was not worth it. So do whatever you want with that information, but that's how much it costs.
Okay. Does anybody else have experiences? Want to share what they've paid or their friends have paid? A friend of a friend paid this amount.
No, it was actually it's a very close friend of mine, and I think it was a little bit what you were talking about, Rachel, where the service itself was great and all inclusive, but I don't think they really understood the nuance of like all the intersections and all the like, of the film.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they were very, pitching it strategically. Where there was, I was like, you have 2 Latina filmmakers, and like, why are you not pitching specifically to these festivals? So I think it lacked intentionality and nuance, and I think that was a problem because they're also not based here in the United States.
Yeah.
So I think there was a little bit of a miscommunication there.
Yeah.
Lost in translation. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, and that's like why I really advocate for, I would love for producers everywhere to be, feel empowered to do this for themselves, because nobody's going to represent your film better than you are. Nobody's going to advocate for your film more full-throatedly than you are and understand the nuances better than you can. So like nobody's better equipped to spot those points of alignment than the filmmaker team yourselves.
If no one else has another question, I also wanted to go back to advice for getting people to get butts and seats for your film. Like other than your friends, like, and not all your friends live in the cities you're premiering in, right? I assume you're traveling, and yeah, your friends probably aren't flying, even though they love you.
Yeah, it's tough. And, it comes down to like, what is the festival doing? Because the festival is on the ground and the festival does have a vested interest in selling tickets to the screenings. So I would look at it more as like, how can you support the festival in that? If you are doing press, if you are doing interviews, like talking it up, making your film sound like a fun time to come out and see. And that's harder for some films than others. Like Hundreds of Beavers was one of my example films in there, and like they did a phenomenal job turning their screenings into really fun events. Like they worked that festival circuit very effectively, but that's harder to do for like a family drama. You're not gonna put on a costume and like have a beer with your audience at a family drama. So it's just, for that, it's like, can you finagle TV interviews? I have a friend whose film was a family drama, and there were festivals that the festival had relationships with the local news. So they sent those filmmakers off to the local news and they did interviews, and that helps get butts and seats, because that is directly appealing to the actual audience who could go, which is people who live there. Whereas like reviews that might be good for you, and maybe that's one of your priorities is getting those reviews. But if it's for a publication that's not even in the city where the festival is happening, it's not going to get you butts and seats.
Thank you. That was super helpful advice.
Yeah.
And insight. Thank you.
There's also like people get creative about viral things that they can do. They ask, you walk around town, you go to the coffee shop, you're in town, you're at the grocery store. You have to just be shameless about telling people why you're there and like inviting them to the film and like, hey, do you like film? I'm doing this thing. And talking about it constantly could get you some butts. It's not for everybody. Not everybody's up for that kind of salesmanship, but if that's your personality, then lean into it.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any final questions? Okay. Well, if there's no final questions, thank you so much again, Rachel, for having us. And really, you did such a great job presenting and going through so much that I definitely personally didn't know about for film festivals. I feel like there's so much mystery and so much we don't know. So really, thank you for taking the time today to talk us through all of your strategy and really demystifying it.
Excellent. Of course. Thank you all for coming, and go out there and celebrate your films with people who want to celebrate with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone, and enjoy your weekends.
Bye.
Bye.